To climb the ranks of Valorant, you need to know what is the best and worst guns you could be using, especially as of the recent patch. Some guns when used are literally free wins, but others are absolutely hot garbage. That's why in this video we're going to be ranking guns from F to S tier so you know exactly what weapons you need to start using and abusing right now. First off, we do gotta talk about the F tier, and in this tier we have none other than the Phantom. I mean, hitting 140 in the head. No, I'm just kidding. We have the knife. The knife is the only F tier weapon. Now, the knife doesn't offer a huge benefit, and honestly, it's just a very inconsistent use. While the knife is sometimes good if you can somehow sneak up on a target and they're standing completely still, far too often whipping out a knife will result in you whiffing your kill, dying, and then maybe even throwing the round. You can basically check highlight after highlight of people failing knife kills and losing rounds because of it. The knife is not a very reliable weapon, doesn't have a very consistent hitbox, and with ping registration, I would not recommend using this knife the majority of the time. Then we're gonna move up to D tier, and these are weapons that might have a very niche use, but overall they're going to be weaker than a lot of other options that you could have for similar or cheaper price tags, and the only weapon in the D tier we have is the Bucky. And if you remember, there has been times in our relatively recent history where the Bucky was overpowered. Consistent one-taps, long-distance one-taps with the alternate fire, but that's no longer the case. This gun has been nerfed and nerfed and nerfed all the way to a state where really it's not very reliable. Too long in between the shots, and you're not that likely to get a one-shot kill. The alternate fire is almost useless a giant percentage of the time, and you're gonna die to good players just trading you out and killing you very, very easily with other weapons. And the Shorty, which is far cheaper, is better as a one and done weapon with faster fire rate between the shots. The Bucky just falls out of playability, and I think it's a little bit too weak to justify putting it in a higher tier. Unlike the C tier weapons, these are weapons that are legitimately powerful and useful, but they're rather niche in their execution or scenarios that they're useful in. So because you're not going to see them that much or use them that much, it makes them a bit weaker than other weapons, but don't count these weapons out because they are still strong. And the first weapon we have in this tier, in no particular order, is the Ares. Some of you are gonna be like, whoa, what the hell? The Ares is actually a good weapon, and it is. It has some fantastic moments. Sovas and Fades can abuse this on maps like Ascent, second round, and it's super strong. But in the random games or the multitude of games that you'll play, Ares doesn't get consistent play, and it's only gonna get play on certain characters. You're never gonna see like a random jet running it down with the Ares, right? You're going to see characters that can gather information, and they're only gonna do it on certain maps and certain map holds. So even though the Ares is very strong, it's pretty niche in the actual situations where it's going to be picked. That means it's only going to be a C tier pick, not because of its power level, but because of its frequency. In a similar vein, we have the Frenzy, a fantastic weapon for rushes. Really good to run it down, especially if you're running it down as a group. You're getting trades out, and you're going to be able to always pretty much trade as long as you're close to a target when they get killed by an enemy, and it's really great for that. But Frenzy, in a similar way to the Ares, is going to be pretty agent specific and map specific. So some maps are just not gonna work with the Frenzy. Like running it down on Breeze with the Frenzy, good freaking luck. But if you're rocking on Haven, then maybe it actually makes sense. So it's gonna be different depending on the map. And then in addition to that, certain characters are gonna utilize the Frenzy better. If you have a way to get in close, you're a duelist, you're a Ray, something like that, you can actually justify buying the Frenzy. But for other characters, your utility is too good, the classic is too good as a comparison to the Frenzy, that you're just not really gonna buy it all that much. So the Frenzy will see play, but it's mainly going to be seeing play on that pistol round, and it's only going to be seeing play on certain maps with certain agents, making it justifiably in the C tier, even though it is a very strong weapon when it's used in the right situation. Now, next up in the C tier, we have the Ghost Pistol, and the Ghost Pistol is still a really great weapon, but it's really only a weapon that you'll ever see in the pistol round. You're not going to see it in any other round. People aren't going to buy this as like a secondary to their primary kit. It's a weapon that only a couple of people, only certain characters can use. When they do use it on the pistol round, they can pop off with it. Most characters would prioritize utility or even armor over the Ghost Pistol, and some characters that use it, there still is a pretty high failure rate at times. Ghost is still a really strong weapon, of course, but it's really only going to be strong in the 2 pistol rounds, which just inherently make it niche, and it's not like everyone's picking it anyways. So yeah, it's a C tier pick for sure. Now keep in mind, if you're looking to climb, by far the most important thing for you to master is the fundamentals, and this goes far beyond things like crosshair placement, counter strafing. It includes things you probably don't even realize you're doing, like peeking, spacing with teammates, or even just where you choose to stand. The players who are consistently able to drop 30 in their matches are masters of all these things, and you could be too now with our Aim God Masterclass that's expertly designed to teach you all the fundamentals that you need in just one course. Our goal is to have this course teach you everything you need to know, which is exactly why we are constantly updating it as users submit feedback. The game is always developing, and that's true on our website too. With new courses posted every single month, you can be sure you're always ahead of the curve when it comes to your mechanics. On top of that, we offer a rank improvement guarantee, so if you don't climb while using our service, you don't pay. We know, it sounds insane, but our number one priority is to be the standing name in the community for years to come, and the best way to do that is to create the best product we can, so check it out using the links right now down below. The next up, we're moving up to the B tier, weapons that are still really solid and powerful. They're not taking over every single game, but you'll always see them in every game you play, and they're gonna have really strong situations where any character can use them and get a lot of value out of them. And the first character we gotta talk about is the Spectre. And the Spectre is just a really solid weapon that is very strong, especially on that second round buy. It's a very reliable weapon that pretty much dominates every weapon that's cheaper than it, even though it does struggle at times to weapons that are more expensive, like the rifles, for instance. Especially if you're playing a character that has a way to close in the gap and utilize their mobility to get in. A character like Jet, for instance, which, by the way, we have an amazing course on Jet. If you really want to start to climb very easily, we break down a lot of Jet players on the website. You can check it out. But Jet is a perfect example of a character that if you dominate that second round against worse weapons and then they buy up, if you have a way to close in that gap, you can still beat better weapons with the Spectre, and it's just a really, really solid and reliable gun. A really large ammo count with that suppressor makes it very simple for you to spray a lot, trade a lot of bullets, and even utilize mobility a lot in your gunfights. Another weapon in the B tier, not in a particular order, but still a solid weapon, is Stinger. And Stinger is just really cheap and very effective in rushes, and on certain agents and maps can be absolutely dominant. I mean, really the only downside to the Stinger is its low ammo count, but the Stinger just has such a fast time to kill when used properly. You can just delete people using pretty much any gun in the game. And a lot of people are gonna sleep on the Stinger because they haven't put in the work, but I would highly suggest running around a DM and practicing using the Stinger. Notice the ranges you can use it in. Notice the type of fights you can win against much better weapons. This gun is very, very strong, and it's useful not only on duelists that have mobility, but really just a lot of characters that are holding sights, and just a really strong weapon to use and abuse in a lot of your games. Next up, we do have the Bulldog, and the Bulldog is just very reliable, especially if you have good crosshair placement fundamentals. It's really, really great at just deleting people if you don't end up in a scrappy fight. So not a run and gun fight. It's pretty much like the antithesis of the Spectre, where you want to have pretty precise fights, and if you do and you have good crosshair placement, you can typically hit multiple headshots in a row on even a Vandal or a Phantom user, meaning that it scales really well against rifles in a more traditional sense than the Spectre, where the Spectre you want to make the fight scrappy, more run and gun-esque. The Bulldog, you want to go back to the fundamentals, and it's really, really great at that. But you got to make sure that if you're using the Bulldog, you're not being forced into these scrappy run and gun fights with people that are using pistols, people that are using weapons like the Stinger, like the Frenzy. If these people run around the corner at you, the Bulldog can definitely struggle in those situations as a not very reliable spray weapon. So it is important that you're keeping your effective range and you're making sure to set up the type of engagements that you want to take on the Bulldog, and you're going to be just fine with the weapon. The next up, we do got to talk about the Guardian. The Guardian is super, super strong if you set up the right situations and you're mechanically really good. So if you have long sight lines to hold, maybe you're holding Ascent or you're holding anywhere on defense on Breeze, this gun can truly shine with great mechanics, and it can be very, very powerful for cheap with better first shot accuracy than the two rifles, the Vandal and the Phantom. But similar to the Bulldog, if you ever get into like these scrappy run and gun engagements, you're completely screwed. So it's really good for challenging sight lines. It's not really that good for pushing up and taking space, especially around corners and things like that. On some maps, it's going to really, really shine, and in some situations, it's going to really shine, and on others, not so much. It's really going to depend on your personal skill set and if you can set up those situations. Oftentimes, if you're buying the Guardian and you're like, hey, can I take your sight? Because you know that the Guardian's good on that site, you do not want to be holding some place where people can close in the gap on you and make it scrappy, dash through their smoke, whatever. You want to make sure that you can keep that distance and take the precise fights that you want to take. But because you can control that, it makes the Guardian really, really good. But of course, you have to put into practice. You have to take your time hitting those shots, and I think you're going to do just fine on the Guardian. Now, the next weapon weapon we do got to talk about is the Shorty. And the Shorty is just nuts. It's so freaking strong. It's very, very cheap and has some crazy high potential. Really, really good at holding space around corners and in any close range corridor. And just a really great gun that if opponents are caught lacking, you can trade up your value just immensely. Like someone buys their full freaking kit, armor, their Vandal, and they turn the corner and die instantly to a Shorty. That's a lot of value that you got for such a cheap amount of money. And really, the Shorty starts to truly shine when you can abuse it with controllers, because people want to push through smokes and you could punish them. Let's say you're Brimstone, you can hide in a smoke, and if opponents just try to go through the smoke without clearing it, you can kill them super, super easily. And if they have that in their mind, like if they think, oh, there could be someone with the Shorty in here, after you did it one time, they're always going to play around it and be like scared of it. So you get a lot of value that way. And there's a lot of other strategies you could abuse with certain weapons on Brimstone, and we have that on our Brim course on the website. You could check that out if you want to get great at Brim. Now, the last up we do got to talk about is the Odin in the B tier. And the Odin is just really strong, especially when we're talking about its wall bang clears. You can get a crazy amount of value just walking around the map, clearing certain corridors and clearing certain wall bangable spots with the Odin. And because of how strong the Odin is, it can actually hold up in a lot of gunfights. Like, unlike other weapons where they're good at one specific thing and then they just lose to rifles, Odin isn't better than rifles in a 1v1 duel, but it's close enough that it can hold its own. And when you combine it with the other value you can get out of the Odin and the really large ammo size, Odin's just a phenomenal weapon and super, super strong. And I think it's actually a great way to utilize your rich economy by winning a lot of rounds to really dominate some of these cheesier weapons or close range weapons that want to hide behind a corner. They want to get a free cheeky kill and find a way to trade for your Vandal or your Phantom with their Shorty or whatever the case may be. But because you have a wallbang weapon, you can flush these people out and punish them for that rad ass style. So yeah, anyways, let's move on to the A tier. Now, the first weapon in the A tier we got to talk about is the Marshal. And the Marshal is just super strong in that second round. You can often kill people with the body shot, and it scales really well long range and still fights versus rifles and even operators, which is insane. And for such a cheap price tag, it's hard to get more value out of a weapon. And there are very few weapons like a Marshal that can really win a round for you in a way that no other weapon can. It's super strong, definitely worth practicing. And yeah, you're going to be able to abuse this weapon a little bit more on characters like Jet and Chamber. You can abuse this weapon on a lot of characters because you can just play out of people's effective range. Just play super, super long sight lines. An amazing weapon on a map like Breeze. And I do think that if you put in the time and effort to using the Marshal, you're going to be able to clutch up a lot of rounds and win these rounds that on paper make no sense for you to win. And you're going to be able to stack up your doubts because of it. The next weapon we do got to talk about in the A tier is unfortunately or fortunately, depending on who you are, the Judge. And the Judge is just one of the best weapons at denying space. If people are trying to push into your space and they don't clear you properly, they're dying to the Judge. The Judge could get multiple kills versus unsuspecting enemies, and the worse and worse people use their abilities and the less they actually are disciplined in how they're clearing corners and things like that, the more likely they're just gonna get rolled by a Judge. Every character can utilize the Judge. It's gonna shut down any rushes, and it's such a great weapon to use when the opponents stop being disciplined. They're just like throwing one a flash or one piece of utility and then 5-man rushing a site. Like, this is a weapon that you shut that shit down. And I understand you might think that the Judge is low skill or cheesy or whatever, but if opponents are just rushing into you and not clearing you, then they deserve to die to the Judge. Make them slow down, make them play more fundamental, and then you don't have to use the Judge. You can use other weapons. But if they are just constantly rushing over and over and over again and just like not clearing everything they could, they're not using their utility well, freaking punish the hell out of them, use the Judge, and yeah, you're gonna be able to shut that shit down right away. The next weapon in the A tier we do gotta talk about is the Sheriff. There's nothing quite like the Sheriff that allows you to trade up in value versus better weapons by one-shotting them with great fundamentals. Like, if you are mechanically really, really good, you have great gunplay fundamentals because you checked out our aim guide on the SkillCapped website, you're gonna be able to really dominate players that are trying to play a similar slow and angle-specific gunplay battle. Because with similar fundamentals, if you challenge a Vandal user but you hit that first shot, you're going to be able to trade up in value really easily. And the Sheriff can clutch up like no other weapon can. In fact, if you are trying to really win rounds that you have no business winning, you need to make it your mission to become a Sheriff demon. Because the Sheriff is so cheap and always relies on gunplay fundamentals, it's pretty much that weapon that you can always clutch up a round with potentially. It always has that potential factor to win a round where on paper you're up against some really strong weapons weapons, a lot more economy, but you know, you take a duel with the Vandal user, you kill them, your teammates pick up a Vandal, you kill someone else with great fundamentals, all of a sudden you trade up 2 weapons, and now you're gonna win the whole round off the back of just really solid sheriff play. It's definitely an A tier weapon. Now, the last weapon in the A tier we do gotta talk about is the Operator. And the Operator, based on just power level and the way that it shapes rounds, is definitely an S tier weapon, but because of its frequency, it's gonna be knocked slightly down to the A tier. Still really, really strong, and it warps pretty much every round it's in around it, but you're not gonna see it in every single round. You're actually gonna see it sometimes very infrequently, especially if you're able to shut down the first op that is appearing on a game in a round or whatever. That's not gonna be carried to future rounds, and you're probably not gonna see it for quite some time. Still, an Operator is super, super strong and hard to play around. It's really important that you're tracking the economy of the enemy, making sure that you know when they could buy an op, who is likely playing an op, and where they would be holding. If you can somehow make it through that first op buy, then you're good. But if you allow an Operator to take 1, 2, 3 rounds, all of a sudden you're going to be playing against an op all damn game, and that's going to be very difficult. Make sure that you're using your utility, you're spending the extra amount of effort to jump peak angles, clear certain angles, gather as much information as possible so you can deduce where the Operator is, either put them in a retake scenario or spend adequate utility and space taking with a rush or a dash or whatever, so that you can make sure to shut it down, so you don't allow it to stack its bread, stack that economy, and you just shut it down right away. But we do got to talk about the creme de la creme, the S tier weapons in the game, and the first one we got to talk about is definitely the Classic. The Classic is free, and so is your elo, so go to SkillCapped.com. Okay, sorry, I was trying to figure out something, but yeah, if you want to climb, SkillCapped down below. But anyways, the Classic is just really solid of a weapon. It's very reliable. It's a great secondary. You can kill people while jumping. You can kill people while running. It has an alternate fire, has a basic fire. I mean, they really stacked this Classic completely in Valorant. It's such a strong weapon to be good at. It's really flexible in a lot of situations where you don't have time to reload, and it makes it really hard to justify buying other weapons like the Ghost and the Frenzy when a Classic with armor or a Classic with abilities can be better a giant percentage of the time. Just a really solid weapon, and you can't really not put a weapon that is just played no matter what, not in the S tier. I mean, it's free, so yeah, Classic's amazing. Next up, we do got to talk about the Phantom. And the Phantom is picked slightly less than the Vandal. They are close, but according to pro play and player pick rates, the Vandal outpicks the Phantom by quite a margin. And I think that the Phantom is better than most people give it credit for. Like, yes, it is frustrating when you dink someone in the head and don't kill them from range and then die. But on paper, the Phantom is the best rifle in the game. I mean, it has no tracing, consistent spray, a large mag, and most fights you're taking are not these super long distance fights, but people want to be able to consistently dink and have that reliability. I think for sure, if you're taking close range engagements and on certain maps that are closer range, the Phantom is just going to be the better weapon. But if you're talking about some further distance engagements, then all of a sudden the Vandal starts to shine. With maps like Breeze in the map pool, the Vandal is a really solid challenging weapon, dueling weapon, able to take fights with weapons like Op in favorable ways if you have good mechanics. And the Vandal is just a really, really strong weapon that is at the very least consistent and reliable in what you want it to do, which is one shot freaking headshot. So both of these weapons are super, super strong. It's really going to come down to personal preference, agent choice, and maps that you are playing on, whether or not you should choose one or the other. But you should definitely put in the grind and know how to use both, because you never know when you're going to have to pick one up, use it on the fly. So become a god at both of these with our skill capped aim god course that you could check out down below. Thank you so much for coming by, and we'll see you next time.